So medical management of uric acid stones. Before speaking about the medical management of uric acid stones, I would like to briefly mention about the pathophysiology. The most important factor in the causation of uric acid stones are the low urinary pH. The low urine pH can be because of insulin resistance. It can be metabolic syndrome, diarrheal states, and high animal protein in the diet. This is a diagrammatic representation of how the insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome ultimately result in acidic urine. Insulin promotes the proximal renal tubular cells, the deamination of glutamine. Deamination of glutamine results in glutamate and then into alpha glutamate. And that particular ammonia is then released into the urine, trapping the hydrogen ion in the urine, making it ammonium, that is alkaline. But in insulin resistant states, this particular mechanism is jeopardized, because of which the ammonia is not released into the urine and the urine remains acidic, and that forms a very fertile ground for the formation of uric acid stones. The second important factor in the formation of uric acid stones is the low urine volume. The low urine volume can be because of diarrheal states, hypovolemic states, even in hot climate. Hyperuricosuria. This is the third important factor in position of uric acid stones. Hyperuricosuria is defined as excretion of uric acid more than 600 milligram per day. At pH less than 5.5, the undissociated form of uric acid predominates, leading to uric acid and or calcium oxalate stone formation. At pH more than 5.5, sodium urate formation promotes the calcium oxalate stone formation through heterologous nucleation. The most common cause of hyperuricosuria is increased dietary purines intake. Hyperuricosuria can lead to two types of stones. One is HUCN, which is the hyperuricosuric calcium nephrolithiasis, which requires high concentration of uric acid, and uric acid stones, which may or may not be due to hyperuricosuria, but always due to low urinary pH. The other causes of hyperuricosuria are gout, myeloproliferative disorders, lymphoproliferative disorders, multiple myeloma, secondary polycythemia, pernicious anemia. Hemolytic disorders can also lead to hyperuricemia. Hemoglobinopathies and thalassemia, complete or partial hypoxanthine guanine phosphoribosyl transferase deficiency, and disorders of the renal tubular urate transport. This is the flow chart depicting all the positive factors leading to uric acid nephrolithiasis. The three most important factors: the low urinary pH, hyperuricosuria, and low urine volume. And what are the factors which lead to creation of these situations? That is the diarrheal states, high animal protein, primary gout, insulin and obesity, myeloproliferative disorders, uricosuric medications, congenital disorders, etc. How to evaluate these patients? Most important is history. Most of the patients are actually recurrent stone formers. In history only, we can get to know the presence of other concomitant diseases like diabetes, metabolic syndrome, myeloproliferative disorders, gout, chronic diarrheal states, etc. Drug history, patient may be taking some uricosuric drug, and dietary history, high animal protein. So history is very important. Following that, examination of urine. Many patients with uric acid stone will also be having acidic urine, that is pH less than 5.5. Uric acid urine analysis will also show uric acid crystals. And because most of the patients are associated with recurrent stone formation, and uric acid itself is an indication for evaluation for metabolic analysis. So 24-hour urine analysis must be done for uric acid, calcium, oxalate, citrate, sodium. Imaging. Uric acid stones are radiolucent stones. In X-ray KUB, radiopaque shadow may not be identified. But CT scan, NCCT KUB detects uric acid stones. Ultrasound is preferred in case of pregnancy. It detects obstruction, but poor sensitivity in case of small stones. Management. The most important in any nephrolithiasis management is the fluid recommendations. One of the mainstay of conservative management is the increase in the fluid intake to achieve a daily urine output of at least 2 liters. This will achieve a dilution of the uric acid in the urine and prevents crystallization of the uric acid. Dietary recommendations. Protein intake increases the urinary calcium, oxalate, and uric acid excretion, and the mathematically calculated probability of the stone formation even in normal subjects. This may lead to formation of HUCN or uric acid stones. Sodium restriction, animal protein restriction, and moderate calcium ingestion decreases the stone episode by 50%, and this particular factor holds true for any kind of nephrolithiasis. Pharmacological management of HUCN. Allopurinol 300 mg per day will result in decrease in serum uric acid and will ultimately lead to decrease in the urinary uric acid as well. Febuxostat 40 mg can also be tried. Allopurinols, which are used in hyperuricuria associated with dietary urine overindulgence, may also be reasonable if the patients are unable or unwilling to comply with dietary urine restrictions. Another important pharmacological aspect is alkalinization of the urine. This can be achieved by potassium citrate, 30 to 60 millicoulant per day, which increases the urinary pH and increases the solubilization of the uric acid. This can be taken into 2 or 3 divided doses daily. In the alkaline environment, the uric acid dissociates into more soluble urate. Pharmacological management of gouty diathesis. The major goal in the management of gouty diathesis is to increase the urinary pH above 5.5, preferably to maintain it between 6 to 6.5. Potassium citrate should be given at the dose sufficient enough to maintain urinary pH at approximately 6.5 in 2 or 3 divided doses. Attempts at alkalizing the urine to a pH of greater than 7 should be avoided, because at a higher pH, like a pH greater than 7, there is always a danger of increasing risk of the calcium phosphate stone formation. That is a phosphate stones. Now coming to indinavir stones. Indinavir sulfate is an antiviral agent that has been found to be useful in the treatment of patients with HIV/AIDS. It is the third drug in the family of protease inhibitors which derive their therapeutic actions through their ability to prevent HIV maturation. But of all the protease inhibitors currently in the use, indinavir is associated with greatest risk for development of urolithiasis. In some studies, after 4 weeks of indinavir therapy, urolithiasis was noted in 0.8% of the patients, and this incidence increases to 4% after several months of use. The pathogenesis is basically crystallization of indinavir that may result in stone that are principally composed of indinavir, or that serves as a nidus for subsequent formation of stones that are a mixture of indinavir or other component. Speaking about pharmacokinetics, the pKa of indinavir is 5.5. That is, solubility of indinavir significantly increases at pH less than 5.5. So the indinavir will be in a soluble state in very high acidic pH. The normal dose of indinavir is 800 mg orally 3 times a day, and it has a very high urinary excretion. The high urinary excretion and poor solubility in a physiological high urine excretion and poor solubility in physiologic urinary pH makes it prone to crystal formation and subsequent development of nephrolithiasis. How do these patients present? Most of these patients will develop acute flank pain or renal colic 4 to 6 months after the onset of indinavir therapy. They can also have hematuria, and this can also be associated with episodic frequency and urgency. Evaluation with urine analysis and serum biochemistry. Apart from the typical history of indinavir patient being on indinavir therapy, when we do urine analysis, it will show indinavir crystals. Hypocytraturia is a frequent finding in patients with indinavir urolithiasis, but it is still debatable whether it is the cause or a contributing factor towards indinavir stones. Serum creatinine may be slightly elevated in some patients. Imaging. Indinavir stones are radiographically translucent. NCCT usually fails to show this radiolucent calculus. Ultrasound can also be used in detection diagnosis of indinavir stones, but IVP has highest sensitivity and specificity for indinavir stones. IVP reveals a filling defect, correctly diagnosing the location and size of the stone. Treatment. The most important aspect of treatment of indinavir stones is conservative therapy. Conservative therapy consists of hydration, pain control, and temporary discontinuation of the medication. MET can be tried after evaluating the size and location of the stone. NSAID should usually be avoided in case of indinavir urolithiasis because of the potential development, because of some reports of renal failure of indinavir nephropathy. Patients with fever or significant ureteral obstruction are treated with placement of ureteral stents. The DJ stents should be removed as soon as possible because of the risk of indinavir precipitation along the stents. And minority of the patients will be needing surgical intervention. Some researchers believe in managing the indinavir stones by acidifying the urine to a pH less than 5, because in acidic pH the indinavir will dissociate. It is soluble in acidic pH. Ascorbic acid is employed in achieving such a low pH. But acidification of the urine may lead to uric acid stone formation and may further worsen the hypocytraturia that is already present in many patients with indinavir urolithiasis. The safest and most effective method of minimizing the risk of indinavir urolithiasis is to increase the urine output to at least 150 ml per hour in the first 3 hours after each oral dose of indinavir. The urine output should be at least 1.5 liters per day, but some researchers advocate that patients with indinavir urolithiasis should have a urine output of 3 liters per day to decrease indinavir precipitation that ultimately leads to nephrolithiasis. Indinavir intake should be less than 2.4 grams per day. While preparing this presentation, I came across few review articles, and one of the review articles had given this conclusion, which I would like to share. Indinavir is unmistakably an agent that potentially has a significant role in battle against AIDS. It would be foolish to limit its clinical application simply because of this potential side effect. Instead, physicians need to learn more about indinavir urolithiasis and to assist the patients to learn to live with its potential complications. Thank you.
Very good. That is a good presentation, Soumya.
Thanks.
Good. Okay, now that we are up to date on management of uric acid stones and indinavir stones. This was discussed because last week we had a case where there was a radiolucent filling defect and there was a lot of, shall we say, lack of knowledge on these. So all of us have, I think, refreshed our memory sufficiently. Good.